Hey there, welcome back to another video, this time in honor of this film's 30th anniversary, because today is the anniversary day for Batman. It was released in theaters on June 23rd of 1989. And since this is a film that is very special to me, it's one of my all-time favorite movies. It's probably my favorite comic book film. I definitely felt like it was a good time to revisit it and also share my thoughts on the film in a more in-depth way than I've done in the past. So, first off, I want to give a big shout out to Mike Martin, a really good friend of mine who sent me this Blu-ray a while back. This is the Diamond Lux edition from Warner Brothers. It's a really cool looking Blu-ray. It's got some great artwork and everything. Really a fan of this set. And it has an extra little featurette as a bonus disc on it. I know there's a 4K release that came out recently, but I am very leery about that because I've heard it has the same white balance issues as the Ghostbusters 4K, and I'm just not into that. So I'm just gonna probably skip that for right now. The film looks great on Blu-ray anyway. The remaster that they did of the print is spectacular. The film has never looked better, and the color timing is correct on the Blu-ray release. So I'm probably just going to stick to that because I don't want to see blue tint and I don't want to see white balance in a movie that's really very gothic in terms of its cinematography and its lighting and everything, and it's done deliberately. It's supposed to be dark. That's the point. If you brighten it up, you hurt the film. So, and you're ruining the movie. So no, I've no desire to watch Batman in that's brightened up. I mean, they already did enough of that on the home video release because people complained that the picture was too dark when the movie was initially released. The film was directed by Tim Burton. It has a screenplay by Sam Hamm and Warren Scarron, based on a story by Sam Hamm. And this is a long gestating project, actually. It started out with a few different writers. Initially, it had the campy sort of vibe that a lot of studios wanted from it because a lot of people, when they were thinking about Batman, they were thinking about the 60s TV show. And it makes sense. I mean, because that was very popular. It was a pop culture phenomenon. But it was definitely more of a risk to do a serious, darker take on Batman because that was not as well known to a lot of audiences. And it took a while for this to get greenlit. In fact, the success of Beetlejuice ended up kickstarting it in a lot of ways for Warner Brothers because Tim Burton was a hot property, and I believe they already kind of had him attached and somewhat to the Batman project, which had been gestating since like 1983. So, and went through different incarnations in terms of the screenplay. And they decided, okay, he's a hot director, Batman. All right. So they greenlit the script in like I think sometime in 1988, and the rest is history. The movie to me is not without its flaws, and I'll get to those soon enough. But despite the flaws that it does have, it is a masterwork. It is a visual splendor to watch of sight and sound. This is a movie that was grand in size, scope, and scale back in 1989 and still is to this day. When you compare this to something like your everyday modern superhero movie, there's something about this movie that just puts it on a different level. And I think a lot of that is its uniqueness, its art direction, its production design, its attention to detail, and even some of the smaller details. The fact that it is, in a lot of ways, an abstract work of art. You cannot look at any other Marvel film and say that in any way, shape, or form it has the appearance or the style that Batman does. And it's understandable because this type of style wouldn't work with the Marvel film because it's not a part of the, it doesn't really fit well with the character, with the characters that are featured in a lot of those movies. But it's just such a breathtaking movie to sit down and watch. It's a movie that, even though I have issues with it nowadays in terms of aspects of the story, some characters, some of the pacing, it's still a film that I love watching because I love this world and I love seeing the production and art design by Anton Furst and company. I love watching that on the screen. I loved watching it ever since I was a kid. Like it's just there's something so captivating about it. When you compare you compare Gotham City and this to Gotham and the Dark Knight trilogy, it's no comparison. The Gotham in this movie and in Batman Returns is visually spectacular and stunning and incredibly memorable and really draws you in and you want to be a part of it. In the Dark Knight trilogy, it's just boring. It's downtown Chicago. There's nothing that special about it. Now, when I'm talking about the story, when I'm talking about some of the issues I have with it, for one, I do not like the focus on the character of Knox. I don't think he's that strong of a character at all. In fact, he's honestly pretty useless. Robert Wuhl's performance is fine. I don't really have an issue with that. He does a good job with what he's asked to do, play a wise-ass reporter, but it's not a performance or a character that is particularly that strong. This is a character that there's nothing to this character. He's just a wise-ass reporter. He says some lines of dialogue. He's there to maybe introduce Vicky Vale, but you could easily have introduced her in another way without him. This is a character you could cut completely out of the movie and the film would not skip a beat. It wouldn't miss a single beat. So that really shows to me how extraneous this character really was and is. And apparently the producers and the people who were making the movie, they fell in love with Robert Wuhl's performance and they gave him all this screen time because of it. And I don't really see why they did that. It's not even really that great of a character. The lines of dialogue he has aren't really that particularly memorable or funny. There's like a few here and there, but nothing like super spectacular in terms of wit. It's a character that takes away screen time and scenes from other characters in the film that for me personally, should have had more screen time. Give that screen time that you have with the focus on Knox to Commissioner Gordon, or more scenes with Vicky Vale, more scenes with Bruce Wayne and Batman. It's just a character that never really stood out to me, even when I was young, as a character that I particularly liked or enjoyed. So, yeah, I definitely want to mention that with Knox. I think maybe I might have not. Maybe I could. Maybe in the past I could deal with him more. But the more I see this movie, the more I realize that this character is not particularly that engaging to me, and there's too much of a focus on him when there shouldn't be one. And the script also at times is a little bit too jam-packed with a bunch of different sort of subplots and things going on. It kind of makes the story feel a bit too leaden at times, weighted down. It definitely affects the pacing. I don't have an issue with the subplot involving Jack Nicholson's character, Jack Napier, being the man who killed Bruce's parents. I don't have a problem with that. I know a lot of people really hate that, but I never had an issue with it. I thought it made the film stand out in a good way and made the dynamic between the Joker and Batman a lot more interesting than it just being some random hood named Joe Chill. So I didn't have an issue with that. What I had an issue with is dumb stuff like Alfred letting Vicky Vale into the Batcave. But I gotta say this: the franchise was at least self-aware of that because in Batman Returns there was a really nice line of dialogue where Bruce is calling out Alfred for letting Vicky into the Batcave, but still, it didn't even need to be there, so that was unnecessary. Also, I would have liked to have seen a few more scenes with Batman. This is a movie that is definitely dominated by Jack Nicholson's larger-than-life persona and his larger-than-life performance as a Joker, and it makes sense because it's a absolutely dynamite, amazing performance. You cannot take your eyes off of it. He's just so powerful. And he just goes all out and so all in with it that you can't help but love it. But that being said, it's Batman, and so would have been nice to have seen a couple more scenes with Batman in terms of some more fight stuff or some more sequences where he's doing a little bit more detective work. I do like the fact that it does show him do detective work in this when he's trying to figure out what's going on with the chemicals and how to stop people from dying. I love that aspect of the script. I think it's a little bit underrated because a lot of the time when you see a lot of these Batman movies, there's not really a lot of detective work going on, and he's supposed to be a really great detective and a really great mind, as well as a great hero. In particular, when it comes to these more Batman stuff, a more thrilling Batmobile chase. That, honestly, when you watch the film, it's definitely a letdown, the Batmobile chase. There's really not much to it. It turns, makes a couple turns, and the Joker's henchmen and cars shoot at it a couple times, and then they crash into something. The Batmobile stops, and that's really it. I definitely felt that was a missed opportunity to have like a really rousing car chase with the Batmobile. I think probably a part of why they weren't able to do that is because of the limitations of the Batmobile itself. It wasn't really a car that could really go that fast, so they kind of had to make do. But that being said, I think they could have come up with some kind of alternative to try to make it a little bit better. I mean, they did that anyway in Batman Returns, so it showed me that they still could have done something like that. They just chose not to. Um, like more for, you know, and I mean, you have stuff with the Batmobile that's really cool, like when the Batmobile shows up at Axis Chemicals and blows up the chemical plant. That's a really cool sequence, and you have the stuff with the journey. I mean, I'm trying to think of the name of the score title, but the sequence in the woods with Batman and Vicky Vale. That's a really great sequence with the Batmobile. But it's just one of those things where I just kind of felt like, man, it just would have liked a really thrilling car chase. Because I mean, I got, you know, I got to give Batman Begins that. Like, it has a really great sequence with the Batmobile that is honestly better than any car chase with the Batmobile in this movie. I have to be honest. That being said, I definitely prefer Batman 89 or over any of Nolan's films, but that's just me personally. And some of the effects by Derek Meddings and company, they kind of don't hold up as well, but some of them really do hold up really well in terms of the miniatures, but there's other times where it kind of looks a little cheap and looks a little cheaper than the $35 million budget, but that doesn't really affect my enjoyment of the film that much. It's just something that I noticed. But other than those things, I love this movie. I mean, and even despite those things, I love this movie. This is one of my, like I said, it's one of my all-time favorite films. I have always been enthralled and really entertained by this film ever since a young age. I mean, apparently, my mom and my dad, when I was born, they took me as a newborn to see Batman when I was just a little baby at the drive-in. I don't remember anything because I was super young, and there's no way I could have remembered any of that. But I still find that to be kind of interesting. The fact that it's essentially the first film that these eyes ever saw. Not the first film that I remember seeing, but the first film that these eyes ever actually saw. So that's pretty special. Now, there's so many things that I absolutely adore about this movie. Tim Burton's direction is, I just think this was the film that really showed his versatility as a director. Because before this, he was doing things that were more in his wheelhouse of these, like, not necessarily blockbuster films. They were smaller films like Pee-wee's Big Adventure and Beetlejuice that were successful, but they were more in his wheelhouse of his quirky, weird sort of surreal movies. This movie has aspects of that, but it's definitely toned down, and it showed you that Tim Burton could still work in this studio atmosphere with a really big film like Batman, like a tentpole blockbuster movie, that his style could still translate in a way that wasn't completely alienating to a wider audience. You could also tell that despite his initial qualms with the idea of making a comic book film, Burton did warm up to it. And you can tell that, and you can see it in every frame of this movie. I think a large part of it is that he really enjoyed the time that he spent with his production designer, Anton Furst. He wanted to get him early on because he really liked his work in Company of the Wolves, and he wasn't able to do it because Anton would take other projects. But finally had the opportunity to work with him, and they were like two kindred spirits. So I think that's another reason why Burton's direction in this is so dynamic and it's so impressive, is because you could tell this is a project and a film. Despite how hellish it was for him to work on it, there were all these other elements with the production that he was genuinely passionate about, that he genuinely cared about. Compare his direction in something like this versus his direction in like the Alice in Wonderland movie, and it don't contest. That's a film he's doing for a paycheck. Batman is a movie that he's doing to really get his creative juices flowing. And that's something that is really missing from Burton's modern work. The story, like I said, the script, it has its problems that I laid out, but it also has some really big strengths. There's some really great lines of dialogue. There's some really memorable moments and sequences with the Joker and with Batman. And despite some of my qualms with it or my issues with it, I still feel it's a fairly solid screenplay. I particularly really like the stuff with the Smilex products and how it's causing all this terror in Gotham City. And you have kind of a RoboCop-esque sort of bit of satire with the Action News crew, where they're not wearing any makeup or deodorant and they're looking all disheveled on camera because they're afraid of dying. If they decide to try to take products to make them look better on camera, they're risking death. And I like that peek behind the curtain, so to speak. And I like the little bits of horror that are put into this. Like the stuff with the Smilex products is terrifying. You just break out into a laughing fit and you like collapse and you die and you have like this really creepy grin on your face. Like it's it's pretty scary actually. This film definitely has a harder edge to it, and then I honestly think its edge has been a little bit underrated over the years. Because a lot of people give this harder, grittier, tougher edge to the Nolan films, and I'm like, they think this is some big campy movie, and no, this is a pretty dark, gritty film in its own right, and a very dark and grimy film. It looks like it's just covered in grease and grime and dirt, and there's just shadows everywhere, and I love it. I mean, it's this perfect mix of shadows and Art Deco architecture and Gothic art. This is a movie that isn't just a film; it's a work of art. I mean, Anton Furst and his crew, they deserve the Oscar that they won. I mean, without a doubt. Like, their work in this is unbelievable. It is so impressive, and it is such a joy to watch. And it's such just to see all of it on the screen. And that's just definitely one of the things that I really really adore about this movie is the production design, the look of Gotham City. I love it. I love it so much. I want to be in it. I want to visit it myself. And apparently at one point in time you could actually visit the Batman set. And man, I wish I could have done that, cuz that would have been a really really awesome experience to have had. And speaking of awesome things, I mean, Danny Elfman's score. This is his first score that he did where he had like a really big budget film that he was doing, and he was very leery about it at first because he's like, this is a really big project and I don't know. I've done a lot of smaller stuff. And he knocked it right out of the park, right from the get-go. This is one of his best scores. The finale bit of music he does for the ending of this movie is some of the best bits of music I've ever heard in a film. I mean, it gives me chills every single time I see or hear it. It's one of those things that is just so perfect. It just meshes with the character of Batman and the atmosphere and the mythos of the character so well that nothing has ever come close to capturing it nearly as well when it comes to a screenplay. I mean, when it comes to a score. I mean, I'm having a hard time even getting the right words in order because it's that impressive to me. It's such a jaw-dropping, chill-inducing score. Like, everything about it is just top-notch. It is spectacular. And it's perfect and fits so well for such a spectacle of a movie. And speaking of a spectacle, you can't have a spectacle or a spectacular, larger than life blockbuster without having a blockbuster cast. You have Jack Nicholson, who was playing the role he was born to play as the Joker. Perfect casting. To me personally, Jack Nicholson is still the best film Joker. Because I'm not taking anything away from Heath Ledger. He's a great actor. He was a great actor. May he rest in peace. But his Joker was more grounded in reality and didn't really feel like the comic book Joker to me. Other than Mark Hamill and Batman the Animated Series, Jack Nicholson has come the closest for me when it comes to really bringing that character to life. Heath Ledger's Joker is something completely different. It's a completely different animal. And Jack Nicholson's Joker is different in a lot of ways too, but because he adds his own sensibilities to it and makes it his own as well. But the Joker who is homicidal but also is trying to do whatever he can to get a laugh, that's Jack. That's not Heath. And like I said, I'm not taking anything away from Heath. That's not the role he was asked to play. But for me, when I think of Joker on film, I always go to Jack Nicholson. I think it's one of his best performances, and definitely one of his most memorable. And furthermore, when I think of Michael Keaton, I think of Batman. Michael Keaton is one of my all-time favorite actors, and a large part of that is because I was introduced to him at a very early age with this movie, and I really came to really appreciate him and his work at a very early age. I wasn't just enjoying Batman. I really liked Batman, so I was trying to find other Keaton films, and so that's where I wound up finding films like Clean and Sober and other films in his filmography. And yes, I know fans at the time were up in arms, writing letters and being really unhappy with the casting because, oh, Mr. Mom is Batman, but he proved them wrong. And he was able to do that because Michael Keaton really did have the acting chops to pull off this type of role. No, he doesn't have the physical traits that Christian Bale or Ben Affleck had or have for for Batman. He's a short guy. He's not particularly that muscular. But he makes up for that with his presence. And for me, I always felt Keaton's Batman is the best film Batman for that reason alone. Like, he really encapsulates everything that makes Batman so great and so memorable and so intimidating. He's not trying too hard. He's not going way overboard with his attempts to be intimidating. He's owning it. He's in every part of it, and he's believing what he's doing. He's not. It's one of those things where it seems like this performance came naturally to Michael, and that this dark persona was something that was always kind of inside him in some way or another. And with every other actor who's played this role, they've had a very hard time, to me, capturing that dark, tortured half of Batman and Bruce Wayne, which is integral to his character. I mean, Keaton, his performance in this as Batman, a lot of it's just a look. It's a look. It's the way that his Batman is shot. It's the way that he moves his head because he can't move as well in the suit. But it all works because it seems like all these movements, despite the fact that it's really because he's limited, they still seem very deliberate, and they add to the mysteriousness of the character. And I just love that there's this psychotic side of Batman that you see more of in Keaton's portrayal than any of these other performances, because it makes sense. I mean, come on, somebody's got to be pretty messed up in the head to do what Batman does. Dresses up like a bat every night and fights crime and is a vigilante. Like, that's something that, is pretty messed up and not normal. And I love how sly he is sometimes with it. Just the smirks on his face. You could buy that Keaton's Batman is someone you don't want to meet in a dark alley because you don't know what he's going to do. And that's very powerful. Kim Basinger is also really gorgeous, and this is easily the most memorable role that she's ever had as Vicky Vale, and she fell into it because she wasn't originally cast for that role. It was Sean Young, who sadly has an unfortunate connection to the Batman franchise. I mean, she was originally cast as Vicky Vale, broke her leg during a horse riding scene that got cut out of the movie, and she ended up being replaced. And then she tries to campaign to play Catwoman, and that falls through. But yeah, Kim Basinger, for a last-minute replacement, does a really remarkable job as Vicky Vale. She's gorgeous, but she's also a character that, to me, definitely does shine when it comes to just this persona that Kim Basinger is able to bring to life with her. It seems like she's not really that well written. She's not that deep of a character, but it's Kim Basinger and her natural beauty for the most part that really makes the character shine. Robert Wuhl, like I said, his performance is fine, does well with what he's asked to do, but I'm just not a fan of the character. Pat Hingle, he's good as Commissioner Gordon, but he doesn't have much to do. Take away some of Knox's screen time and give Pat Hingle more to do. Or Billy Dean Williams as Harvey Dent, who I really liked as Harvey Dent. I would have really liked to have seen his portrayal of Two-Face. I think that would have been interesting to see. Instead, we got Tommy Lee Jones trying to one-up Jim Carrey in terms of hamming it up. Or trying to play Jack Nicholson's Joker all over again in Batman Forever. That's a whole other story, though. Michael Gough as Alfred is just special and wonderful, and I will always have a soft spot for him and his performance in this and throughout this particular franchise. Just a very kind man, and it was so perfect for the role of Alfred. It's like the perfect grandfather figure for this film and for Bruce Wayne. Jack Palance is chewing the scenery as Carl Grissom, but it works. It's a great casting choice to play a mob boss. Tracy Walter is very underrated as Bob. I really liked his performance. I liked his character. There's a reason why a lot of people remember him, despite the fact he doesn't have that many lines of dialogue. He got the role because he's really good friends with Jack Nicholson. So, good. I mean, I can't imagine anyone else playing that role. William Hookins I also liked as Eckhart, with his like gravelly voice. I guess he was doing his best Christian Bale Batman impression before Christian Bale brought it out in The Dark Knight, because it sounds like he's been drinking Drano. Um, and there's a few other actors and actresses, but that's the main cast for the most part. They all do their jobs really well, but it is definitely a film that's dominated by Jack Nicholson and his larger than life personality. And the film is better for the film actually it really benefits from it. It's one of those movies where I can't think of it being anywhere near as good as it is without Jack Nicholson and without Michael Keaton. And without underrated people involved with the production, like Dave Lee, who is the stunt double, the fight double for Michael Keaton in this film. Michael Keaton isn't really doing a lot of the martial arts, and you can tell when you watch this movie, and that's okay because it gives Dave Lee a way for him to showcase his talents. And he's a very talented guy, and he's still really flexible to this day at an older age. And from everything I've heard about him, seems to be a genuine, real article. I also want to mention Bob Ringwood and his his costume design, because he's the one that built the bat suit, and it is a very iconic bat suit. It's very different to what was in the comics. In the comics, he didn't really have all black. That was not a thing. So this is a decision that initially angered a lot of comic book fans, but they warmed up to it eventually because it's a pretty badass looking suit. The Batmobile design, it's my favorite looking Batmobile. It looks great. It is so slick looking and stylish. Maybe it's not as practical as some other designs, but it makes up for it with the look of it. And it was a definite crowd pleaser when the film came out, and for good reason. And there's a reason why it's still so memorable. And there's a reason why a lot of people, when they think of the Batmobile, they think of this Batmobile, because it is a very iconic design, along with the Batwing, which is another really inspired choice. Because I don't even know if the Batwing was even in the comics yet. I'm trying to remember whether or not this was an invention for the movie or it was already in the comics. I know there was a bat plane, but I don't know if the Batwing was really a thing yet. I could be wrong though. But it's a really great design because it looks exactly like the bat insignia on his chest. And I mean, and speaking of that, the marketing for this movie, like holy shit, what a genius marketing campaign. And a lot of the credit goes to Anton Furst again, who brought Gotham City to life. Anton Furst also was the guy behind the advertising. He was the guy who came up with the idea to have this simplistic, minimalist poster with just the bat symbol. That was his idea. So, wow, I didn't even know that until recently. So I have even more respect and admiration for Anton now after figuring that out. I mean, that is one of the most iconic posters out there. And it's just a very simple, straightforward design. And the advertising campaign and the merchandising for this were just unreal. Like Avengers Endgame can't even compare. I mean, this film made $750 million in merchandising alone. No modern Marvel film can say that they've come close to that kind of thing. At least not that I know of. I mean, this is a movie that is not only a great movie in multiple different areas. I mean, the direction, the score, the performances for the most part, even the soundtrack. I really like the Prince songs, especially Party Man and Trust. It's a movie that is great to look at. There's nice fight scenes and some really good fight choreography. There's an attention to detail that is honestly kind of unrivaled when it comes to a lot of these comic book movies. I mean, something really simple really stood out to me. For instance, there is decals and stuff in the film on the Joker's jackets and on the Joker's vehicles, like the cars and the helicopter, of the Joker's face. And it's not just a straight up copy of the Joker from the comics. It's a combination of the Joker from the comics and Jack Nicholson's actual facial features. Like, that attention to detail is amazing. And that's one of the many things when it comes to the attention to detail in this movie that are just jaw dropping and are really a sight to behold. And then you have the impact of the film, which is unparalleled. This is easily, if you ask me, arguably, I probably wouldn't say it's the most influential comic book film, because I honestly would give that to Superman the movie, because it's the first one. It's the first comic book film that people took seriously. That wasn't just child's play. But Batman is the comic book film that made it a phenomenon, that made it a pop culture event. It's the film that finalized the formula for the modern blockbuster. It's the comic book film that saved the genre itself. This is a context with this movie that is completely overlooked nowadays by a good chunk of people. And a lot of people give the Dark Knight trilogy or the Dark Knight all this praise and all these accolades and all this rub, say that it's more influential than Batman 89, and that's a bunch of bullshit. Because Batman 89, it did save the genre. The genre of the comic book film was dying before Batman 89 came along. You had Howard the Duck, which was one of the biggest bombs of the 80s. You had Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, that came out 2 years before Batman 89. And it was a massive bomb, and critics absolutely savaged it. And for good reason. It's a shitty movie. Batman 89 comes along, and despite the enormous risk that it is, far exceeds expectations, and is the biggest film of the year. $35 million, which at the time was a considerable chunk of change, and that's not even counting the advertising budget. And it made $411 million worldwide. Enormous hit. Massive. And because of its success, studios realized that the comic book film genre was something that audiences did want more of, that audiences were looking forward to, and it was a genre that was worth putting money into. If this film underperformed or it bombed, it could have been one of the final nails in the coffin of the comic book genre in mainstream cinema, because there's no way in hell that these major studios were going to put big budgets into comic book movies if Batman bombed. It just would never have happened, because the risk would be too great, and their modus operandi has always been about money. It's about profit. And if it's not profitable, then it's not something that they want to invest in. Now, would the genre have eventually reached the heights that it has today? Possibly, but not in the same trajectory. It would have been a slower climb if it even actually climbed up to these heights in the first place. And it's not only that when it comes to Batman 89 and its impact, it also impacted how home video was marketed. Like, it was a huge milestone for the home video market. Before Batman 89 came out on home video, no film had come out less than 6 months after it was released. That was unheard of. And no film came out with a low price either. Folks, if you think Blu-ray and DVD, you think Blu-ray sales are expensive nowadays, you have no idea VHS back in the 80s were costing you 80, 90, $100 just for one tape. That's why a lot of people went to rental stores and rented movies, because it was affordable. That was the only thing that they could afford, most people. Batman comes along and Warner Brothers completely shatters the system and is like, "Nope, we're releasing it for $24.95." And other retailers actually knocked that price down even more. And despite that, it sold gangbusters. In fact, it was actually a good decision, because it sold more copies than it would have if it was marked up at a higher price. So Batman '89 not only changed the entire landscape of the comic book genre as we know it, it also changed the entire landscape of the home video market. The Dark Knight can't say that it did any of those things when it comes to overall impact. As successful as it was. And I wanted to mention that because it's something that I definitely feel is a part of this film's identity, and it's a part of this film, and a part of the reason why the film continues to resonate so well to this day to so many people, because it is a genuinely impactful and powerful film. I don't really know what else to say about Batman '89, except I want to give some rub to the cinematographer Roger Pratt, who did a really wonderful, just gorgeous job working alongside Anton Furst and Tim Burton in terms of doing everything he could to make Gotham City as dynamic and as eye-popping as it is. The editing by Ray Lovejoy to make it as taut as you possibly can. And once again, give a lot of credit to Danny Elfman, because the score is this film's heart. And without this score, and without the score the way that it is, it wouldn't be the same either. I don't think the film would be nearly as powerful, nearly as stunning or spectacular without Danny Elfman's score. Now, other than those few other things that I mentioned earlier that I had issues with, the film is very close to a masterpiece. And if I were to rate it out of 5 stars, those little things only bother me I mean, I don't even know, because, like, they bug me, but I would say they bug me enough now that I would knock a half star off. But that's it. I mean, I'm giving this 4.5 out of 5 stars, 2 thumbs straight up. Definitely see this if you haven't already. I'm guessing that if you're watching this, you've seen the movie multiple times, like I have. And there's one critic, I forgot who it was, but they said that the film was a triumph. And I think that's a perfect way to describe Batman '89 to this day. It's a triumph. It's a triumph of filmmaking. It's a triumph of a comic book movie. It's a triumph of a DC adaptation. It's just a triumph, period.